Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Kate Madigan with the Michigan Climate Action Network. This podcast is also brought to you by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. Today, we have a special episode to talk about the Michigan Climate and Clean Energy Summit coming up on May 24th through 27th. This year, we've decided to combine two successful events into one big digital event. We're combining the Michigan Climate Action Summit and Groundwork's Michigan Clean Energy Conference. So joining me today to talk about the exciting speakers and sessions that we have planned over the 4 days of the summit are Jim Lively, Director of Program Strategy at the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, and Jamie Simmons, Engagement Director for the Michigan Climate Action Network. Welcome to the podcast, Jamie.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for having us today.
And welcome back to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you, Kate. Glad to be here.
So I want to set up the context for this year's summit. You know, this is a really important moment for climate action, and especially climate solutions that center equity and benefit everyone. A lot is happening in Michigan and at the federal level, and a lot has happened over the past couple of years. We all know that Michigan's governor has signed a climate executive order that sets a goal for our state to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and to do this equitably. Climate is finally a priority nationally, and racial and social justice are also finally national priorities. And the Biden administration has made climate and equity priorities of his administration. Already, we've seen multiple bills introduced in Congress around climate change, and many are very ambitious and center equity and good jobs. And we have a pro-climate majority in Congress. We know this is a moment where we need to make as much progress as we can, both at the state and the federal level. So our summit is going to feature state leaders, we're going to feature federal leaders, and we're going to have a very strong focus on equity and justice in our climate work and focus on all of the great community work that's happening around the state. So a few highlights are that we have Jacqueline Patterson. She's the Director of Environmental and Climate Justice Programs at the NAACP. She'll be one of our keynote speakers. We're going to have speaker from the Whitmer administration talking about all that's happening in our governor's administration here in Michigan. And we're also going to have our U.S. senators and other federal leaders to really talk about what's happening in Congress and at the federal level. So we have a really exciting lineup of speakers and panels. We're going to have opportunities to network. And overall, our goal of this summit is to move forward ambitious and equitable climate solutions and actions. So I'm going to pass it over to Jim Lively now to share a few more details about some of this.
Thanks, Kate. I am really excited to be partnering with you on this summit. We've worked together for some of the climate action summits in the past, but I'm really pleased to be partnering with Groundwork and the Michigan Climate Action Network to bring this big 4-day virtual summit. And, you know, we couldn't pull off an event like this, just two organizations. We need to really engage all of the partners in our networks. So I want to thank some of our partners now, especially all of the partner organizations and the many that are in Michigan Climate Action Network and many that have sponsored the event. And also to the businesses that are part of the Great Lakes Business Network, which Groundwork is a hosting organization of, who also help sponsor this event. Specifically, I want to call out a few. I want to thank the Colina Foundation, University of Michigan's Fastest Path to Zero, Water Furnace, Varnum Law, and King Orchards. Thanks to all of them for their top support of our summit this year. And also I want to specifically call out Cherry Republic for sponsoring our Tuesday evening networking happy hour. Because, you know, we're going to be virtual this year, but networking is such an important part of these conferences. And Cherry Republic is hosting this networking hour to help make sure that there's a way for us all to connect and make those important relationships, keep them strong. So to kind of give a little more highlight back to some of what you were talking about, Kate, we will be hearing, you know, I want to talk about both what we're going to hear from the state of Michigan as well as the federal government talking about climate and clean energy solutions. So you mentioned we'll be hearing from the Whitmer administration on Monday, but later in the week, we'll have a special panel with previous podcast guests, Douglas Jester and Brandy Brown, who are going to really talk more specifically about how Michigan is going to reach that carbon neutrality goal that Governor Whitmer set out for us to be carbon neutral by 2050. We really need to get serious about it. And we have Douglas Jester and Brandy Brown are going to really help us think through how the state of Michigan is going to lead us into that exciting future. We're also going to talk about one of the bigger issues that's facing the state government and has some federal implications, and that's the Line 5 pipeline. There's clear climate and clean energy implications there, and we're going to have a panel with the Bay Mills Indian Community President Whitney Gravel and Beth Wallace from National Wildlife Federation. It's going to be an exciting panel as well. And then on Tuesday, the second day of the conference, we're going to have quite a focus on the federal policies that are happening and hear from some of the policymakers there. So after or just before the happy hour on Tuesday, we'll be hearing from both of our U.S. senators from Michigan, U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow and Senator Gary Peters, who will address us and give us some idea of what's happening in the Senate and in the Congress. And earlier that day, we will also be hearing from keynote speakers from the Biden administration, and we're targeting speakers from both the White House Office of Climate and the Department of Energy. So it should be a very interesting day to hear really about what's going on at the federal level, because we know things are different now in Washington. And then on Wednesday, we're going to take another focus back onto what's happening at the state, and we're going to hear from state legislators at a legislative panel Wednesday evening that will be led by our partner at the Michigan Environmental Council, Charlotte Jameson, who's going to lead a panel. And we'll hear from state legislators in a bipartisan manner, introducing bipartisan legislation on issues like EV charging infrastructure, which is something extremely important moving forward in Michigan. We're also going to hear about community solar bills that are going to help us make solar projects an easier thing to happen at the community level. And then we'll also hear from leaders that are advancing even more aggressive climate bills that will help Michigan hit that all-important carbon neutrality goal. So quite an exciting lineup from both the federal and the state level to hit, this important moment that Kate, you talked about. But we're also going to hear from a lot of our community partners, as well as make sure that we're really staying focused on that equity theme that we talked about as well. And so for that, I want to turn it over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Jim. This year's summit will feature an array of conversations that highlight the climate and environmental justice efforts across the state. The 2021 Michigan Climate and Clean Energy Summit will feature panels that will tackle conversations around how we center communities and workers as we tackle climate change and how our cities and communities are leading on climate. We will also take a look at how our state is working to electrify and decarbonize our forms of transportation, the connections and impacts around tribal and clean energy, and how we can build movements that center our young leaders around the state and within our local communities. This year's summit will also offer 9 interactive panels where we'll get the chance to hear from several organizations and coalitions around Michigan about the work they do and what those efforts mean for our states. Some of the topics within this interactive session will be reimagining leadership roles within our organizations, democratizing energy, organizing communities for climate action, and declaring a climate emergency. This session will also be an opportunity to dive deeper into the conversation around Line 5 and around tribes and clean energy. This year's summit even has a very special component where we will be launching our very first climate awards. These awards will be given to a professional, individual, and young leader within our state that has made a significant impact within climate action movement in Michigan. If all of this is not enough to get you excited to join the Climate and Clean Energy Summit this year, we have an additional opportunity coming up this June. Michigan Climate Action Network will be launching an Understanding Equity and Justice within Climate Action Network, where we will challenge those in attendance to expand what equity and justice means for our state and explore how centering BIPOC leadership within climate and environmental justice efforts will transform our state to lead in a race to a just transition. We are so excited for you to experience the Climate and Clean Energy Summit this year and for the summit to push the climate action agenda forward in our state. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Kate.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you, Jim. Yeah, we have so much content and amazing speakers that we're going to be bringing together for the summit. I'm really excited for it. We also have other surprises, like music that will be part of this too. So I hope that you will all join us. Tickets are still available and scholarships are also still available. You can go to our website for the event, miclimatecleanenergy.org, to learn all about, see the schedule, and get a ticket. We're also going to be recording the summit. So if you're not able to join live and see all of this, you will be able to watch recordings whenever you're able to. And we'll be sharing some of the speakers, the recordings of the speakers over the podcast throughout June. So stay tuned to hear some of the featured talks on this podcast. So thanks so much, Jamie. And thank you, Jim, for joining us today. Yeah. And we hope to see everyone at the summit.
Look forward to seeing you there.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. You can find more episodes of the Speaking of Resilience podcast at our website, groundworkcenter.org/podcast, miclimateaction.org/podcast, or on all major podcast platforms. If you appreciate this content and want more of it, stay up to date by subscribing to the podcast wherever you listen in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps other listeners find the Speaking of Resilient podcast. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Groundwork Center and at MI Climate Action. Speaking of Resilience is created by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities and the Michigan Climate Action Network. This episode was produced by Taylor Cramer of Cold Shower Media in collaboration with Nick Loud of the Boardman Review.